So theologian Martin Laird, in his book, Into the Silent Land, tells about his walks in the prairie. He says he goes to walk in the prairie to calm his mind and to sort out his thoughts. He tells about how often when he's taking these long walks, he encounters a man who has 4 Kerry Blue Terriers. Kerry Blue Terriers are tall, beautiful blue-gray terriers, and he says he sees 3 of them bounding through the prairie. Like the owner will stand back on the trail, and these terriers bound and run and rejoice and are having a great time bounding around because it's a big, open, safe place where dogs are allowed to roam. It says, but one of them stays right by the master and runs in tight little circles and runs and runs and runs and runs and runs, but always in these tight little circles right by his master. And Martin Laird says that one day he went up to the man and said, why is this dog not bounding with the other ones? And he said, well, he was a rescue and he had been kept in a small cage his whole life. And so the only way he knew how to run was in a tight little circle. And today's gospel reading kind of reminds me of this tight circledness, this anxiety coming out in things that close us in on each other, right? We have the disciples who have been sent out, which makes them apostles, who have come back to share what has happened. And we have all of the crowds who are closing in and won't give rest and won't give up and have desperation and pushing in and crowding and reaching and racing. And the words that Mark used evoke this sense of running in circledness, right? Mark is the shortest of all of the Gospels, and Mark chooses his words carefully, and we should pay attention when he says things. And so the words in this reading are hurried and at once, immediately, rushed about. They went wherever he was. You get this urgency. You sense the anxiety. You sense the desperation. It's almost overwhelming, these senses in this gospel. And Jesus sees all of this chaos, this running in circledness, this anxiety coming out, and has compassion on the people. In the Gospel of Mark, one of the biggest metaphors that he uses is Jesus as the divine shepherd. He loves to use this. Jesus as a shepherd for the people that do not have a shepherd, the people who are lost, who are scattered, who are unmoored, who are vulnerable. And this juxtaposition that he uses of Jesus as the shepherd is supposed to remind us and help us think of the rulers of the day who ignore the needs of their people. At the time of the writing, he tells about, we have just heard about Herod beheading John the Baptist. And so we're supposed to think of Jesus as the divine shepherd who has compassion on and cares about the well-being of the people over and against Herod, who thinks nothing of cutting the head off of somebody and ignoring the needs of the people and lives in the lap of luxury while his people cannot. And so we have this image of Jesus to show us what way of life that God sees for us rather than what human leaders or society might see for us. What is a different way to live? And Jesus is clear that our focus is to be on God, that we are to, as Howard Thurman, a theologian and who was a mentor to Martin Luther King Jr., says, we should center down into God. Center down. Isn't that a beautiful image? And so Jesus says that we should do this. So we have in this reading the apostles returning, and in the thrill and excitement, kind of the high of their return, remember they had been sent out 2 by 2 to heal and to proclaim the good news, and they've been able to do healings and proclaim, and they've gathered other people and they've spread the word, and they come back to Jesus. And I picture them like my children when they were all little and would go off to do something I'd ask and it would actually work, and they'd come racing back in, and all of that energy just exuding from them. Mom, 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 mom. Guess what? Right? That energy, you can feel it coming out. And I imagine that also because they've had so much success, they're like, oh, we need to go do more. When do we go back out next? What's our next assignment? What else can we do? That accompanied with the huge crowds that are coming around them and pushing them in may also increase their need to go and do more And Jesus sees these crowds and he sees the energy and he sees the great need of the community. And he says to the apostles, what you need to do is go away to a deserted place and rest. Not go and do more, not care for all of these people here, not deal with every single thing that needs to be done, not keep on, keeping on, but stop. Be still. Find quiet. Center down into the endlessly supportive arms of God. Jesus himself embodies this centered downness, right? He constantly goes away to pray. He doesn't get pulled into doing all the things. He never heals all the people. He never tends to all the needs because that is not the model that he wants to set for people. He reminds us always that living in God's grace gives us a freedom beyond any the world can give. Stop and be quiet. Martin Laird reminds us that we run in tight little circles, even while immersed in open fields of grace and freedom, because the memory of our cage remains. And I wonder, beloved, what cages hold or have held you that keep you running in tight circles? Do parts of your life feel relentless or hurried or rushed or anxious or impossible? Do you find yourself being testy or on edge or unable to slow the energy within you? In times of crisis, which we have been living in for almost 2 years now, the memory of the cage is stronger within us, both individually and corporately. That impulse to keep running in circles and keep going and keep doing. The energy around us, the anxious energy pervades the air and keeps us moving. And so slowing and stopping and healing from this relentless cycle of demands can seem impossible. Indeed, even Jesus and the apostles had to work for it. The gospel tells us that they couldn't have even a meal to themselves, right? They couldn't rest even when they wanted to initially. They had to keep striving for it. And so how do we do it? Author Barbara Kingsolver gives some advice that I think is really, really helpful. It's also dog related, which happens to work with the story. She says, stop a minute right where you are. Relax your shoulders and shake your head and spine like a dog shaking off cold water. Tell that imperious voice in your head to be still. And there's something to stopping a minute, like we do before the service starts, right? Stop. Put your feet on the ground. Relax your shoulders. Shake your head and spine. Shake off that energy and tell your head to be still. Because once we allow ourselves to have some measure of stillness, some measure of quiet, we start to get a glimpse of the healing that comes from presence with God. And I imagine that this is what's happening in the second part of our gospel reading when Jesus is slowly moving through the crowd, centered down into God, peace and calm exuding from him, that this is what people are reaching for. They're reaching just to touch the hem of his cloak. They're clamoring to get just a touch, just a small connection to that centeredness in God, that deep, deep peace, which heals our souls within, which releases us from the circles and releases us to bound in grace and freedom from the inside out. Beloved, I invite this for you to stop, to go away to a quiet place and rest a while. And so I offer to you one of my favorite prayers, this prayer from Howard Thurman, how good it is to center down. How good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashing with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull. With full intensity, we seek, ere a thicket passes, a fresh sense of order in our living, a direction, a strong, sure purpose that will structure our confusion and bring meaning in our chaos. We look at ourselves in this waiting moment, the kinds of people we are. The questions persist. What are we doing with our lives? What are the motives that order our days? What is the end of our doings? Where are we trying to go, and where do we put the emphasis, and where are our values focused? For what end do we make sacrifices? Where is my treasure, and what do I love most in life? What do I hate most in life, and to what am I true? Over and over, the questions beat upon the waiting moment as we listen, floating up through all the jangling echoes of our turbulence. There is a sound of another kind, a deeper note which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. It moves directly to the core of our being. Our questions are answered, our spirits refreshed, and we move back into the traffic of our daily round with the peace of the eternal in our step. How good it is to center down.